Welcome back to the Clever Dev. What we are looking at today is the MUI Stepper component, and it's really a pretty interesting component. So you just are directed through some tasks or steps, and it's pretty cool, just a visual. And it looks like this is part of the stepper, but really it's just a separate area, a separate component. If you'd like that, there is a subcomponent so that you can kind of couple them together more tightly if you desire. But anyway, a pretty cool component. I don't know why I've never dug into it and covered it before. Anyway, I want to mention that I am starting with the nonlinear stepper in the MUI docs as my base, and so there's a lot of code around state management in there. I'm not going to dive into that code specifically. I'm just going to show you how I set these colors that we could see, this custom icon, how I created a form area down here. So I just want to make sure that you get some background if you need it, but also all the code for this tutorial will be available in the video, in a link in the video details to my site, Smart Devpreneur. So if you want to copy any of my code, then you'll be able to see it there. Here we are in the code, and like I mentioned, a lot of this is already set up from the MUI documentation nonlinear stepper demo. We will use some of these state management values as we are working on our custom styling and getting that custom icon in. So there is a lot going on here already, and I'm really not going to get into most of it because most of this code is really about button handling, whether to show the next button or the finish button or a reset button or whatever, and that's all just specific to their demo. What we really care about is that there's this stepper component right here. We can see inside of that we are looking at these steps, and there's an array of steps up here. You can see there's 3 steps, and so for each one, we render a step. And inside of that step, we render a step button. There's a couple different things that components, subcomponents, I'd say, of the stepper. And so, like, there's a step label and a few others. One, I forget the exact name, but it allows for maybe more coupling of whatever our content is. I think it's literally called step content. But anyway, so there's a couple things like that. My particular demo, I'm focusing on the step button. There are some similarities in all of the components inside of the stepper, but what I'm specifically going to be using is if we look at the DOM on our step buttons, then if I say complete step, so now this is the active step right here, the first 2 are completed. If we go into the DOM, the really interesting thing that I see is on this completed one, for example, the SVG, I see this MUI completed. And on this step that is still active here, then I see MUI-active. So we can use that information. That's not set by any code that I've written or any code that was in that MUI starting code base that we're working with here. This is just something internal to the component itself where it is setting that active or completed class. What this means is that we have some useful selectors, classes in the DOM to select for applying some styling. So let's start there and go back to our code and work on applying that styling. So we'll have to apply that styling. Then after that, we will add a custom icon on the last step. And then we'll look at the form data, how to add in some form data. So I'm going to come up here to the top, and up here is where I will add our custom styling. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep it all within one styling object that I'm going to call step style. And so within here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say box shadow is 2, and background color is, let's say, RGBA, and we'll say 0, 0, 0, 0.1. So that'll just turn into a gray color. And then padding of 2. So let's add our step style down here. I'm going to add this right at the top level of our stepper component. And actually, I'm not even going to have the internal braces. So step style is an object, so I only need one set of curly braces on my SX prop here. Now let's go take a look at the changes here. So if you remember, just a moment ago, we did not have this great background color here. We've also got some box shadow. I added the padding because without that padding, then these buttons are just bumped up right against the edge of our stepper. So all of that was applied at the MUI Stepper root right here. And remember, every MUI component, when we're in the code, we think of them as components, but they ultimately just render as a combination of two things, an element and a class or multiple classes. So in this case, our stepper is ultimately rendering as a div and as this MUI Stepper-root class. And there's a few other customization or props you could say. I haven't necessarily applied them, but they're there by default. So like the MUI Stepper-horizontal class is applied because that's a default setting. There is a vertical stepper, and so if we had flipped the prop to make it vertical, then I presume that there would be a class called MUI Stepper-vertical on here. Anyway, so that was the easy part. Now the hard part is digging into our steps here. So if you remember from our code, there was a stepper, and then for each step, it rendered two components. It rendered a step component, and inside of that, it rendered a button. So we see MUI step-root, and then we see this button, and it's got quite a few of classes on it. So it's got the MUI button base class on it, but then it's also got the MUI step button-root on it. So that's really what makes this particular button a stepper button as opposed to just a regular button. So the buttons are kind of heavy inside of the stepper. We can see that there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. So what we need to do is we need to, if we want to apply certain styling on completed and different styling on active, and let's say no styling at all on the steps that are not active or completed, then we can use our style step object here that's applied at the top level to our stepper, and we can just create some nested selectors inside of it. If you wanted, then you could have a separate styling object that you apply right on the step button. So just a couple different ways you can go about it. What ultimately matters, though, is the selectors that you use. So since I've got mine at this top level here, I'm going to create this selector, the MUI active selector. And so inside of here, what I'm going to do is I am going to, first I'm going to target the icon. We also want to customize the line in between each circle. But first I'm going to target that circle. And ultimately we saw it was rendering as an SVG. So we're going to target two things here. First, we're going to target the button, which rendered as an SVG, and we're also going to, after that, target the line in between each of the buttons. So they will both have the MUI active class applied to them, which is a really handy thing. And so let's first target that button. So inside of here, I'm going to say another ampersand, and inside of here, I'm going to say MUI step, let's say step icon -root. And so this is a class that I saw in the DOM, and I'm using it as my selector here. And inside of here, what we're going to do is we'll just say color is, we'll say warning.main, and then we'll say font size of 2rem. So increasing the font size will increase the size of the SVG. That's how SVGs work. So we've got our MUI active. I also pointed out the MUI completed. So let's go ahead and add that styling before we try to style the lines. So we've got our ampersand here, .MUI -completed. Make sure you get the casing right. The M is capitalized in MUI. The C and the A in completed and active are not capitalized. So here we have, once again, the step icon root. In fact, I will copy this styling here and paste it down here. But instead of warning main, let's say secondary.main. Now let's take a look at this in our app. Here we go. Okay, so far so good. You remember I had already completed these two, and then this one is the active one right now. So this is all looking good. So we see our MUI active. So if I go back to this previous one, it's already been completed, so it is not rendered active again in this particular demo, but our third step is no longer active. But I go back to the third step and it gets that active class again. So now we've also got these lines in between. They're kind of interesting. We'll see if I can get one. There we go. So these are, I'm not doing anything to render these. This MUI step connector -root, this div and that class, That's just the stepper handling that for us, so pretty nice, cool thing there. If we look at the styling though, then we will learn a little bit about what we need to do to change the color of it. So inside of here, I see there's a border color and it's got kind of a gray color to it. So that tells me that that's exactly what we need to target if we want to change the color of these. So I'm going to target this MUI step connector line class. So here we go, inside of our MUI active, but not inside of our MUI step icon root. Then I'm going to say and dot MUI step connector dash line. And here I will say the border color is what we talked about targeting, so I'll change the border color to warning.main. And I will copy and paste that down here because it's the exact same, except we want to be consistent, and so we'll have secondary as our styling down here. So now we can see the preceding line is what is kind of packaged with the current active step. So this line is counted as active still. So a pretty cool thing. And there's that MUI active class on it. So now we've got that done. And just a reminder, these are a little bit bigger because we added that 2 rim. So pretty cool thing so far. Next up, I want to add this custom icon. I'm going to add it on step 3 like we saw in the intro. Before I do, just a reminder that all the code for this demo is available there's a link in the video details to my site. So this one's definitely heftier on the original code that was already in here. So definitely you might want to go check out and be able to copy and paste the code from my article. Also, I have an MUI course on Udemy that I released several months back, and it really goes super deep into styling components, and so I think there's a ton of value in it. I've got an active coupon in this video and all my videos, so definitely check that out. All right, so let's get that icon in here. So the icon's kind of interesting because what we want to do is we still want to render a step button, but instead of we don't want every single step button to have a new icon. So we're going to have to be just a little bit careful on when we render that icon. So what I'm going to do inside of here is I'm going to say if index is less than 2, if the index on our steps is less than 2, then we're going to just render this normal step button. And if it's equal to 2, because we only have 3 steps, or really if it's at the completed, then what we want to do is render that it's like a review icon is what I am putting in there, because we're going to give them some data. We're just going to present the data in the form that they've put in on step 1 and 2 in step 3 and let them review it. All right, so this is going to be quite a bit of code, so just bear with me on just being patient as I type all this out. So first we're going to put this step button back in there inside of these curly braces. First thing we're going to do is we're going to say if index is less than 2, then what we're going to do is we will render this step button here. I'm going to pop it in there. Otherwise, what we're going to do is something really long and complicated, pretty much. We will, once again, stick step button in here, but here we need to say that the icon is our custom icon. And so I'm going to say it's the visibility icon. That's what I imported here for this spot right here. So far, not too bad. But the problem is that this will not get the colors that I have applied up here. So maybe my selectors are a little bit off, but we're going to have to handle the styling on our step button on this second this kind of custom step button with a custom icon. We're going to have to handle the styling on that separately. So you can see right here that even if I refresh this, if I reset it all, then we're just not getting the custom styling that we'd expect on that review. So anyway, just wanted to show that that's kind of problematic before diving into the styling on it. So once again, just be patient as we code all of this styling. Let me format this just a little bit. And right here is where we are going to add our SX value. And it's just going to be long. So what we're going to say is the active step is equal to 2. Then what we're going to do is add some styling in here. And just a reminder, the ampersand means add all the previous selectors, it's kind of like a shorthand for saying all previous selectors that are available, that are applicable. It's as though they're right here in my code. And then I've got my space, so then I'm looking for a child with this MUI SVG icon-root class. And so we'll actually add the styling here. Got to get my stuff right there. Then we're going to say font size of 2 rem here. So far what we've got is if it's this active step, if this step button, this final step button is active, or in other words, if the active step equals 2, and remember that's the index of this special button here, then we're going to apply this styling. But what happens if the active step is not equal to 2? Well, then we need to handle, well, maybe it's completed. Maybe that final step is completed. So then what I'm going to say is all steps completed, and that's the function. So if that's true, then the styling that we will apply is we'll do something similar. We're going to say and, we'll say dot MUI SVG icon dash root. And we'll have our styling in here. And here we're going to say color secondary dot main. And this is just like our styling before. Font size 2 rem. Okay, so let's make sure we got all our curly braces closed. So everything looks good so far. We've said, okay, if the active step is 2, do this. If the last step is actually completed, then apply this styling. But we still need one more thing, and that is, what do we do if the final step is not active, it's not the active step, and it's not completed? So maybe they just open the form, the stepper, and they're on step 1, right? What do we do in that case? So that's where we need some final styling, and what I'm going to add here is just a little bit of styling to make it gray instead of black, just like all the other steps are gray when they are not active or completed. So here what we're going to do is I'm going to say, once again, it's the ampersand and then the dot MUI SVG icon dash root. And here I'm going to say that the color is, in this case, let's say just RGBA. Oops, got to have that in quotes, RGBA. And we'll say, I actually looked in the DOM to check on what that gray color is, and it's simply this. So it's basically kind of a mildly opaque black, actually a significantly opaque black color. So there we go. Looks like we have no issues with our compiler, so let me refresh over here. And this is good so far. Our final step does have that icon, and it is grayed out because it's not active right now. So now it's active, and it's got the worn color that we expect, and I completed it, and it's got that purple color. So there we go. So it looks like our styling is good to go. And even though it doesn't look quite as big as the other buttons, it is actually getting the font size of 2 rem on here. So we can see it here. It just happens to be an icon that's not quite as big as these circles are. So don't be confused by that. We're actually good to go there. So now the final thing that we need to do is we need to actually add in our contact form. So I've already created a contact form. Nothing too special about it. What it is it is a form. This is just a React component here. There is actually no form component in MUI, but there are a lot of form subcomponents that the MUI component library has. So like the form group, even you could say things like the text field and input and so on. Those are all form components. So anyway, I have a form that's composed of 3 things. The first is a form group that's wrapping 2 text fields, so that's step 1. The second is a form group that's wrapping a desktop date picker. That's the only thing in step 2. And then the final form group is wrapping 3 typography components, and it's just grabbing the form values, the form values.name. I'm not going deep into how I built this form because I have other videos on building out the forms, so definitely check them out, or articles on my site. Definitely check those out at smartdevpreneur.com. However, what is interesting about this and is specific to the stepper is what I've done is I have actually added a prop so that we can pass the step into the contact form. So that's, of course, getting dynamically passed as steps are active. So this is whatever the active step is. So anyway, I then use that step number in our form group, and I display only if it's that step that is active. So, of course, this first form group we only want to display when active step is 0, JavaScript, of course, being a 0-based index. So if the step is 0, then don't do anything to the display value. But if the step is not 0, then we're going to set it to display none. So that's how all 3 of these form groups are. So what we need to do in our stepper then is the place to add this. It's a little confusing. There's so much going on inside of this stepper. Here's where our stepper ends. And here's where components that are going to be rendered immediately below it, like the buttons, like the next button, the complete step button, the reset button. Those are all in this area. And so the demo that I forked from MUI, it already has a lot of that set up. So then the question is, where do we put our contact form that we built? So it needs to go above the buttons. However, they've got this little thing in here that says all steps completed, you're finished. I chose to leave that in. Potentially I could have removed that and had my own thing in there, my own component in there. But anyway, if all steps are not completed, and so that's wrapped in a React fragment. If all steps are not yet completed, then we've got another React fragment that basically wraps all the rest of the components, all the buttons for going forward and back and so on. That is where I want to add my contact form that I created. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to have kind of the shortcut closing tag on it, and let's take a look at our prop. So our prop is named step. So I'm just going to add this right here, and then I'm going to pass the active step. And so we're going to grab that from this state value right here and just paste it in there. Simple as that. And we're getting dynamic information into our contact form. So let's go see it in action. Now we should be back where we started in the intro to this video. And so we can see that here. We can see that I have a form, and if I add that information, and if I add the step 2 information, and I forgot to actually complete the step. Not that it matters for my form. My form will actually, I'm not going to complete step 2. My form is actually dynamically updating as values in it are updating. So in this particular demo, the complete step is just like a little nice to have. And really, I just included it for the styling. But anyway, everything is looking good with our form. And so really, that's all that there is to the stepper component, to styling it. There's a lot more to explore with it if you wanted to look at some of the other components, other subcomponents that can be used inside of it, like the step label or the stepper content. So anyway, this is just one example among quite a few potential options. But what really matters is that MUI active and MUI completed classes that get applied to the steps in the stepper, and really just being unafraid to dive into the DOM and do whatever it takes to update the individual steps as you need. And then really getting a form in here is a super simple process. Nothing special about it at all, at least in this particular demo. And the reason that I chose to add a form is that I could see from keyword research that a lot of people were using the stepper with a form. So this is just one particular example of that. I hope that this was some helpful content for you, and please do consider subscribing.